Hi, welcome everyone to virtual table number 6. My special guests today are Kyle Jaster and Martin Bide. Kyle is a regenerative pig farmer in the Catskills of New York, practicing regenerative practices in agriculture, and we're going to talk about that. And Martin Bide is one of the foremost textile scientists in the world. How's that, Martin?
That sounds very flattering. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about wool and dyes and all kinds of good stuff. But first, we're going to talk about making bolognese. The reason for that was, well, Kyle is a pig farmer, raises pork, so I thought we should do something with lamb and pork, and to me, that's spelled bolognese. So. We did bolognese, and I'm eager to see what everyone did. I did a practice session, and then I shot the video, and both of those I did pappardelle. But I actually don't usually eat pasta, and unlike Martin and Kyle, I don't know how to make it, so I just did a courgette today, which is making essentially making pasta out of zucchini, just spiralizing it. So let's put up the photos of what we did and then talk about it a little bit.
Sure. There you go.
So mine is on the left, and Martin's is in the middle, and Kyle's is on the right. So Martin, talk to us about what you did, how it went.
Well, I don't know if other people are familiar with the recipe that you shared with me, but it was thorough. Let's put it that way. It's pretty complicated. I tweaked it down a little bit based on what I know and what I've done before. I have a friend locally who grows sheep, so I got my grand lamb was really local and fresh and good. I couldn't do the same with the pork, unfortunately, and but if I do this again, I'll try harder with that. And I thought that the traditional sauce would have beef in it. And so let's change it up and let's leave the beef out. So compared to the recipe you gave me, I didn't put the beef in there. But I made it and shared it with a friend and my wife, and they both thought it was great. So this is a great recipe. I'll add it to my recipe box and cook it again.
And you made your own pappardelle, right?
Yeah. I don't often make my own pasta, because especially the last bit, cutting it into fine spaghetti or anything like that is hard work. But pappardelle works well because it's nice wide strips. So yeah, that's one of the good excuses for making my own pasta.
Great. Kyle, what about you? How'd it go?
Yeah, it's great. I made polenta as a base, although I'll make pappardelle this evening. And one of my tricks to making pasta easy is I have a vacuum sealer, and if you vacuum seal the pasta dough as soon as you've made it, it instantly hydrates all of the flour, and so it cuts down the time for making pasta fresh. From you got to wait half an hour to basically you can run it through the sheeter instantly. So. That's what I'll be doing tonight. But for the bolognese itself, well, of course, I used my own pork. My neighbor raises sheep primarily for meat, actually, not for wool. I'm sad to say, although we've tanned a few of the hides, but used obviously the ground lamb that from one of the animals that we processed here on the farm last year, and beef from a good friend, and I make my own prosciutto, and so I subbed that in for the I can't remember what it's called there, but yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So I subbed that in, and then we're in spring. We're in kind of the spring alliums here. So I subbed green onions for the onions, and garlic scapes for the garlic, and pulled some carrots from the garden. And what else did I sub? Everything. I think everything else was good. I'm out of chicken livers at this point in the year, so I get those back for another 2 months, and then and so we just I just kept with the rest of the umami bomb component, and it's worked out great. My whole family is coming over for Father's Day dinner tonight, and we'll be having the other 6 quarts of it here. So yeah, it worked out great. It was a wonderful recipe. Yeah.
I've been working my way through 12 quarts of it. I don't, because I had to do it as a trial before I did the video, and then I did the video, and I've given a fair amount of it away, but I don't think I can take any more bolognese for a while. But garlic scape sure making me green with envy. I was hoping that the Old Saybrook Farmers Market opened yesterday, and I was hoping they would have it. They probably will in the next day or two. But for those folks that don't know what garlic scapes are, Kyle, why don't you tell them?
Sure, it's the hardneck garlic. You plant it in the fall, and it grows, and then it starts to flower. And in order to to enlarge the bulbs, you have to pluck the flower. And so the scape, which looks kind of like it almost looks like a noodle, but it's the beginning of the flower of the garlic. Farmers snap them off, and they taste wonderful. They're great in pesto. They're great in all kinds of things, and they're just kind of a fun seasonal ingredient. Good way to get garlic if you're.
Our farmers might let them go a little longer, but they have the size and shape and color of a green bean, and it's quite long, 3 feet long.
Well,
But they're great. Yeah, I use them for pesto mostly, but you can actually use them instead of both the basil and the garlic, and it's quite good. Right.
Yeah, we do a big pesto with them. We just sub them for every garlic, anything where you need garlic in a recipe. And we started doing a ferment, which is like a 20% salt ferment, which keeps them very bright and green, and they last throughout the rest of the year, which is really fun.
Yeah, I did a cooking demo at the Old Saybrook Farmers Market using garlic scape pesto, and then I fried some ripe tomatoes and then put that on it, and then put that on sourdough and gave it away. It was like it was like flypaper. People were just flocking because of the smell of the garlic scape sauteing in the olive oil. I bought 2 zucchini yesterday. I'm glad I did, because my first try at making this with zucchini didn't work out so well. And part of it was, I found, when you put sauce in jars, it doesn't necessarily have the same consistency with every jar. And I thought it was a little thin. So the reason mine has the color it is that I added some fresh cream to it. And I actually think it thickened it, and I like the color better. It is a little incongruous using courgette, which is a zucchini made into a noodle essentially, with a meat sauce. But it worked. So I just couldn't eat any more pasta, I don't think. But so Kyle, talk to us a little bit about your ideas on regenerative agriculture and the role of animals in soil enhancement. And then I sort of want to get into how you actually sell your pork, but start with some of the ideas. You wrote a great article in the Washington Post, an op-ed, and I thought, that's why I reached out to you. It was just great, and people should read it. But share some of those ideas, if you would.
Well, sure. So, I mean, I think I've been on a now almost 10-year journey into farming and trying to figure out how do we fix local food systems and make, I think, make the world a better place through the way that we eat. And one of the things that became clear to me pretty early was that and has only deepened as I've gotten further into my life here on a farm, is that there's this incredible tie between living animals and the plants that feed them, and that you cannot. It has come to me to feel quite unnatural to not participate in both sides of an ecosystem. There's a constant interplay between all animals and plants, and the way that they interact is so so elegant and has become something where it's kind of like, oh, you have to participate in both sides of this to make it work. We need to have animals on land in order for the land to be healthy, and this is most obvious in the way that particularly ruminants, herbivores like lamb and beef, consume the tops of plants and then turn that directly into fertilizer that grows more of the same plants for themselves. And when you think about that and extrapolate it to the way that we interact with the world, it just seems kind of obvious to me that we have to be, in order to create an environment where we're cycling carbon effectively, we have to be our society has to participate in that life cycle, and so we have to have animals on the grass in order for the grass to grow healthily. It does not grow well without animals, and therefore we have to have a way for our economy to participate in that activity, I think. And so, given the way that we live now and the way that our culture works, it makes sense to me to have animals on land growing it and feeding the soil, and then us benefiting from both sides of that equation.
Right. Martin, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
Well, I just agree with a lot of what he's saying. The article that you described as the introduction of you to him, the one phrase in that really grabbed me was "less meat but better meat." I think that's a really good takeaway from the whole thing. I'm living on a patch of land here which is rocks and trees, but I think when it was farmed, sheep were about the only thing that would be viable on this land. The rocky Rhode Island, and I think there's a place to bring that back and to, as he says, regenerate the soil, regenerate the land, capture some carbon, and do it well. Again, grow better meat, and we can eat better meat, and maybe less of it.
When people walk through the woods and they see those stone walls,
that's right, yeah,
I think they realize that almost all of those are walls that were around sheep pastures.
Yep, exactly.
And they're not very high, most of them, because sheep don't climb over walls to get to the grass on the other side, as long as the grass on their side is good. And the farmers then, like now, could rotate them around. So I think it was almost more property boundary than sheep enclosure, but
yeah, that's a good thought. I somehow imagined they put wooden stakes on top of those walls.
Maybe, but if they were trying to keep goats in, they would have to do it. But I don't think the sheep are so much of a problem. But
I don't think you can keep goats in. I don't think that's it goes against the laws of physics as far as I think.
Yeah, one of the things that I've discovered working in this wool venture and talking with a lot of sheep farmers is, up to 80% of their income comes from the lamb rather than the wool.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty hard to have wool without lamb. I mean, our mantra is wear wool, eat lamb for health and planet. You got to do both. I respect the fact that some folks are vegetarians, but us meat eaters need to eat lamb and pork and, ethically raised beef and the rest of it. So tell me a little bit, Kyle, about how your process works. Do you sell pork as a CSA, or are you selling it retail, or are you selling it to restaurants, or how does that work?
I've done all three. I started out as many small farmers do, doing the CSA because it's a good way to kind of finance the business, and as you don't know how to really do it, which I certainly didn't when I started. It's pretty risky, and you're going to make some mistakes, and so a CSA is a really great model for that. As my management practices matured and my understanding of how to run the business matured, I was able to move into some wholesale to restaurants, particularly some very great restaurants around here that that support local agriculture. Bread Alone is a really wonderful bakery that was a very early participant and bought from me some sausages, and then the De Bruce, which is a great restaurant here, probably going to get a Michelin star soon. That they were very, very supportive of me. And then as I've matured and my scale got something a little bit bigger, I've moved actually mostly into a few salami products. I have a saucisson sec and a chorizo and a black telecherry pepper salami, and those have been great for me because I like many small farmers, I also have another business that I run, and so the shelf stability and the value added really helps in making the economics work for the pork product.
They must be popular because every time I've looked, they're sold out.
It is well, the pandemic has been very good for local meat farmers, and so I certainly have benefited from that and feel very lucky that I was in a place where I could benefit from that. And yes, and also they're incredibly popular. I basically have them all sold before they arrive at this point. So it's been kind of funny because I don't really intend to grow. I can't really do more pigs this year than I did last year, and so I'm kind of in a funny place where the demand far outstrips my ability to supply it.
And you have the pigs, foraging in the woods, right?
So yeah, there's if we want to get into some of the pieces that make my pig farming regenerative, there's an interesting thing about pigs is because they're monogastrics, I don't get the benefit that you get with lamb, where it's immediately you're regenerative if you're as long as you put the sheep outside. For me it's a little bit harder. I do two things. One, I rotationally graze them, so they move through the woods through a series of about 45 paddocks over the course of their life here at the farm. And those paddocks start small and get bigger as the animals get larger, from anywhere from a few hundred square feet when they're piglets to where they'll be there for 4 days, and to an acre when they're full size and they're quite a ways up in the woods. And it's been an amazing, you can see it on my Instagram at Atticus Farm. I've got a couple photos where you can see the dividing line between where the pigs have been and where they haven't been, and the amount of grass that's growing on the pig side is just unbelievable to me. It still shocks me when I see kind of the difference in what happens with that management. And I do that, which is a really good practice for resting the land and letting it recuperate, letting the soil support more plant life, and of course it's very well fertilized. In fact, one thing that I do that's a little bit interesting is I will throw seed out, so rye seed and peas and other broccoli, kind of a broad mix of about 30 plants, and I throw it out about a day and a half before I move the pigs onto another pasture. And so they've actually tilled the soil for me, and they compact all of the seeds in, and so when they leave, it's all planted and good to go. And when they come back, the next group comes back the next year, it's like looking great and has cherry tomatoes and all kinds of stuff growing in there. So
Lovely.
it's a really fun way to do it. I do that, and then the other big piece for me is that as a monogastric, the pig really still requires a fair amount of high protein feed, so 14 to 16% protein feed. And I've worked with Stonehouse Grain, which is a regenerative, about a 2,000 acre regenerative grain farm in near Hudson, New York, where the farm manager and I worked a program together that's all non-GMO seeds, mostly barley and peas, and that helps them recuperate their land, because the peas obviously provide a lot of nitrogen into the soil, which allows them to grow corn later in the year. So there's a lot of kind of moving pieces to that. I hope I didn't over explain it.
Monogastric meaning one stomach, is that
Right.
is that-
Yes. Yeah. So they eat food like humans do, as opposed to the way that a ruminant does, where they don't have they're not eating the grass and then regurgitating it and chewing it down and fermenting it in their stomach. They just eat it.
Yeah, so Martin, I watched one of your lectures. I think it was one that you were giving at URI. It may have been when you were, your farewell lecture. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
there was a slide, I think, in that, or at least you said it, that the world needs more wool, and that kind of stuck with me. So I just want to probe you on that. Sort of why does the world need more wool?
Well, I'm not sure I said actually that, but probably my sentiment was that I see a lot of sheep farmers and I see a lot of wool going to waste, and that to me seems bad news. It seems tragic. So the world needs to use more wool. I think the world needs to not waste stuff. I don't like wasting food or anything else. But and I think you brought up a point about the prime income for a sheep farmer would be from the meat, and the wool really is a byproduct, but it still is a product that should be used.
Right.
And it needs an efficient system to gather it, sort it, to judge its quality, and then turn it into something that people will find attractive and useful. I mean, you could make all kinds of rough, hairy, nasty things that look, I've used it, but they wouldn't sell too well. But I think we have the technology to be able to make attractive products, and Jane Philbrick's been doing a great job of trying to get into that kind of stuff. So I think that's the important part. And again, I'm not a farmer. I admire intensely what they do, the things they have to juggle. But I think if someone's growing a sheep for fiber, it makes no sense to just let it grow 1 year. So you've got to grow it for multiple years and collect lots of fiber. But then you have a very mature meat. And coming back to the recipe we had today, I think I use lamb meat. It's less than a year-old creature that's been slaughtered, and I would maybe like to see, well, if I use 3-year-old sheep meat, mutton, can we call it mutton that I grew up with? In a recipe like this, where the strength of flavor should really come through, what would happen? Is there any kind of market for the meat from a fiber sheep? Someone, I want to grow a fiber sheep. Well, what value can I get when the sheep is 3-4 years old from the meat?
Yeah, the fiber sheep will, depending on how quickly the farmer wants to increase the flock, the fiber sheep will throw off lambs. And typically they'll cull the males. It's not a great proposition to be a male in the animal world.
It's like bees.
Yeah, but sort of.
Chickens.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this recipe would, especially with the chicken livers, it would do well with mutton. The chicken livers was such a dominant flavor. It's meant to be a background flavor. It's almost a little too dominant for the mix of veal, especially is what I use, veal and lamb. The pork could hold its own, but I think a little stronger flavored lamb would have been better. I agree with you on that. Yeah, so in my view, one of the reasons why the world needs more wool is the role of grazing sheep in open pastures and carbon sequestration.
Yep.
Because as I understand it, when they graze and then the grass regenerates, the roots are pulling atmospheric carbon pretty deep down into the soil. And there's a certain point where the soil couldn't take any more carbon, but they fixed that because they take up carbon when they eat the grass. So there's this constant, they're taking the carbon out, the grass is pulling more carbon from the air, and then it ends up in their fleece. So they're about 50% carbon in the fleece. And then when we wear the garments, we're carbon sinks on 2 feet. So it's just if you're serious about decarbonization, one of the strategies is sheep.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just having a lot of sheep grazing in pastures is going to do a lot of decarbonization.
Yeah. This is, I would say, the one important thing about that is that the way it's grazed is quite important. So you really have to do rotational grazing to make that carbon sequestration work. And there's a long history of particularly in the U.S. here of less managed grazing, to put it gently, where it's kind of leave the sheep in here for a year and see what happens, and you kind of slowly denude the land and have a lower quality food base for the animals. And so it's important to keep them moving.
Right. Paddock to paddock.
But as long as you're doing that, then yes, yeah, it's a phenomenal approach, it seems to me. I hadn't thought about the carbon in the garments themselves, but of course it's there.
Yeah, versus, you know, synthetic textiles, which is like wearing an oil slick in my view. But
it's burning a dinosaur to eat to wear one.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So, you know, the other there's a bunch of parts of the process of making textiles and garments that can be greener or less green. And, you know, the farming is a big piece of it, but it's also whether you use dyes and if you use dyes, which dyes you use. So I know, Martin, you've spent almost your whole life, I think, thinking about dyes. So I'm interested in your view on what's a sustainable dye. What does that mean?
You're opening a big box here, and I'll try and keep it short. And this word sustainable kind of bugs me a little bit.
Me too.
And this whole conversation, we got to remember there are almost 8 billion people on the planet, and some of the practices that are ideal can't feed that planet. We need to keep these ideas alive while hopefully the world population in 100 or 200 or 300 years drops back to a sustainable level. But having said that, okay, if we're gonna dye something, what's the best way to do it? And you've got the dyes that you're going to use. You know, you have to think about them, and then there's the processes you use to apply them. And you would like those to be simple and efficient processes. For most fibers, I think there's really no excuse to try and use any kind of natural dye to do it. It's just especially for cotton, you know, it's a really difficult job to get a natural dye to dye cotton. If you go to a natural dye workshop, I bet you're going to dye wool, because wool is pretty good at soaking up dye. So there, you know, if any fiber has an excuse to be dyed with natural dyes, it would be wool. It's still not the most efficient process, because all the different natural dyes tend to require several different kinds of process. So if you want a green piece of wool, you've got to apply the blue one way and apply the yellow the other way. So you're going through two processes. If you use a synthetic dye, one process will do it. So it's hard to get the efficient process by using natural dyes. But again, wool is probably the one fiber that you could say natural dyes would be a good idea. So.
Yeah, and I suppose this is just totally anathema to somebody who's a colorist and dye specialist, but you could also just use the wools undyed.
Of course, and I've got a roadie warm blanket with the, you know, it's got a nice check pattern on it from black wool, white wool. You know, it's beautiful. I like it.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the northeastern wools is there are 30 different breeds of sheep here. It's not like the West where you have Rambouillet and that's about it.
Yeah.
So they come in different colors, different textures, different lengths, and so there may be an opportunity to do things using less dye. But that's interesting to me that if one was going to use natural dyes, the fiber to use it with is wool. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I'll try not to get too high on my hobby horse here, but one thing I find interesting is that the global organic textile standard will not accept synthetic fibers, but you can dye something with synthetic dyes and it will still meet the organic standard. I think there's been a recognition that there are some things that you just cannot do with natural dyes that you can do efficiently with synthetic dyes that lets the organic people say, okay, let's do it.
And I would assume that not all synthetic dyes are created equal, that some are more toxic than others.
Very few are toxic anymore. And I love to quote a study that was done 30 years ago that looked at the acute toxicity of about 4,000 synthetic dyes. I think 85% were less toxic than salt. And the active ingredient in madder, natural dye madder, was about one of the worst 1%. So, there are very few toxic synthetic dyes around right now. We've learned our lessons and recognized the bad ones and put them out to pasture.
One of the things in thinking about how you would increase the wool yield and the lamb yield in the Northeast is to convert dairy farms to sheep farms, or just add sheep to dairy farms, because there's been such a reduction in the contraction in the dairy industry. I think they're just feeding the cows, not making better milk, but they're using plant and the model of the big dairy farm with big pastures is endangered. So if we want to keep those open spaces, we got to get them into sheep. Is there, where do pigs fit into that? Do pigs get along with either of those, cows and sheep?
Yeah, so there's a couple of innovative uses of pigs in a multi-animal system that really work. But it's unique because they'll graze, but they're not grazers. So one model that I've seen that works quite well is start with beef, follow with chickens, then go with lamb, then go with turkeys. And so you're kind of alternating the grazers and the manure. You got a pretty hot manure off of chickens, then you go into lambs, and then you got to go into sheep, and then you go into turkey, and then rerun that cycle. And that works very well. And then you're going to say, well, where do the pigs fit in? And the answer is in all of those systems, what I've seen is at some point you've got a winter and you're not grazing, and so you end up putting the animals in a barn or some kind of a system where there's going to be a lot of manure in one place. And so Joel Salton calls them pig aerators. A way to manage the manure is to do a bed of wood chips, dump the manure on top, throw some corn on, dump more wood chips, and then let the pigs in, and they will actually aerate that into a really rich compost. And so then you can turn that into
they're just rooting around for the corn, and in the process they aerate the rest of it.
Correct, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I've seen that model work really effectively. There's another pretty serious scale regenerative farmer, Greg Gunthorpe, out in Indiana, is doing a similar thing. He started in pigs and has now added lambs on this year, actually, and started doing sheep this year, because I think he's got enough kind of grass going that he wanted to keep that system running. And so, where pigs fit in a funny way, but in a really good way, where they're really great at tillage. So anywhere where you would actually want tillage at broad scale in some format, but a really gentle tillage, right? So they're only going to go 2-4 inches down.
Right.
works wonderful for that. And then also in manure management, they're actually a really great tool.
Yeah, one of the things is, we have a relatively short growing season here, is that you can't have sheep that are 100% grass fed. I mean, you could have some hay. I guess they could be grass and hay,
Yeah.
but most of the time in the winter, you're going to supplement the hay with other feed. And one of the most interesting things I've come across, the last guest on Virtual Table 5, Ann McIntyre Launer at Olympia Farm, she gets the grain of the spent barley wort from the microbreweries that they were otherwise paying somebody to take to the landfill. Yeah. And their sheep love it. And they seem to do well. I don't think it's the sole feed, but it's one of them. So that's kind of a cool, using the microbreweries, which are everywhere now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's a traditional use for pigs as well as kind of the conversion of the human edible waste stream into new food. Yep. Is really good. I mean, there's a very long history of that with animals, all Europe and here in Asia.
Yeah, food waste to pigs. I mean, I grew up working in summer camps where we would feed the food scraps to the pigs, and at the end of when all the campers were gone, we would slaughter the pigs.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it was very efficient in terms of a zero waste concept, right?
Yeah.
I was watching the Chef Table episode on Dan Barber, and he talks about this farm that he redeveloped. It was really derelict, and he's brought it back, and he adds another animal to your parade. He sends in the goats first.
Right. Yes.
The goats take the brush away, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a neighbor doing that now, and my challenge always with goats is just keeping them anywhere.
Yeah, finding them, finding them after you let them in there.
Yeah, they're quite a handful. But yeah, that's a great way to do it. We've seen that. There's a lot of kudzu is a big problem in the South, and I've seen a lot of people use goats for that.
You know what's another problem in the South is feral pigs.
Yes.
Overrun. I've been a breeder of, I don't do it anymore, but of Portuguese Podangos, the little ones, but the big ones are boar hunters. And I've always telling the Portuguese, man, there should be a market for your boar hunting dogs because they're just overrunning a lot of the country, right?
Yeah, I've heard that. I haven't witnessed it personally, and I haven't been able to figure out is why people aren't just eating them all the time.
Yeah, go hunt them.
Yeah.
They would be acorn fed,
right?
They've got to be tasting good,
or mesquite or something, yeah,
or everything they can, I guess. So, have you noticed, Kyle, that as your soil has improved, that the flavor of your pork has improved?
Yeah. So my farm was not. I'd say that the quality of the meat has improved the most by changing the mix of the feed itself, which is a much larger percentage. But we do now finish them on acorns and hickory nuts because of the timing of the year and where they're eating, and that's been something that I've had several chefs say, like, oh, I can tell that you slaughtered these after they ate nuts. Like it's a very different product from what you get when you're feeding corn and soy generically. And the soil here has improved mostly in ways that I think would probably be too subtle to be really impactful, but you never know. I mean, certainly the biggest thing has just been that the animals are so happy, and that you could, I sound crazy, I know I'll sound crazy, but you can taste that they're happy animals. It's like just very clear to everybody who eats them.
Yeah, Dan said that on that Chef's Table video as well. Happy animals make good food.
It's true, and there's science behind it too, which is that animals that exhibit a lot of stress hormones immediately prior to slaughter have a very distinct flavor, and so you can taste the difference. Like quite people have done studies on this.
I wonder. I wonder if that extends into the fiber. I don't know if Martin, you've heard anything whether animals, sheep that are raised well and ethically and with concern for the animals' health and well-being, produce better wool. Would that be true? I don't know.
It's not something I've ever come across, and yeah, I think for like us, they say once it's left the scalp, I think it's more or less dead. So
yeah, but I've seen a lot of wool, more wool in the last year than this 60. But there is a real difference in quality from place to place and farm to farm. I'm sure there's tons of reasons for it, starting with the breed, but even within a given breed, there'll be variety from animal to animal, even on the same farm. So I'm wondering if there's. It would be good if doing well by the animals produced better fiber. That would be
I think it's careful husbandry that is a bigger difference. And again, my experience with this is just some years ago working with the Rhode Island sheep farmers, collecting wool to make their blankets and selling them as a cooperative. The wool gathering day, everyone would show up with their truck with their 20, 30 fleeces. The real issue that was there was the bedding that the sheep had been in, or how clean the wool was, and an awful lot got rejected just because it was just too dirty to clean up and make a useful product out of. So I think that's the real issue is the husbandry to look after the wool as much as to look after the sheep itself.
Right.
Just to tag on to that, just to tag on to that, I do know that happier cows produce more milk. That there's so my kind of thesis in starting this farm was to be able to say that good husbandry had economic value, right? That there was a way to show that doing the right thing led to improved economic outcomes for the farmer, because that's the easiest argument to have with the farmer. Hey, here's a way to make more money, right? And so like if that's kind of the way that we approach this, I think people, it gets people's attention a lot more than like, wouldn't you feel good if something, that's not a great argument when somebody's strapped for cash. And so which is the state of virtually all farmers.
Right.
So so I'd be interested. I wonder if there's a kind of an argument, and Martin, you just kind of made it, that the return on investment is higher, right? If you're betting right and you're doing all if the husbandry is right, then you're gonna see lower rejection rate on the wool, which is you're clearly a sign of better economics.
Yeah. And at the other end of it, if I'm only getting a few cents per pound for my wool, even if it's clean, that's not going to force me to be a good wool farmer. But if if the price goes up, if there's value there, and we can get this wool stream going, then again, okay, the price goes up. Now I think, okay, it is going to make a difference if I use the right bedding and so on. Yeah, it's a feedback loop. Just
right. Exactly. Yeah, it's what you said earlier. It's not so much the world needs more wool. The world needs more high value uses for wool.
Yeah.
So that the farmers will make more of it. It's going to be market signaling that, right, rather than so much happy sheep. It's happy farmers because they're getting a decent price per pound for it, right? I think there's still, there's still going to be primarily selling lamb.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even with a radical increase in the price of wool, you would still be making much more money on the lamb than the sheep. And I'm not sure I understood what you're saying before about having, sort of older sheep than are kind of processed. I guess they use that term. And then it's mutton, and people have this stigma about mutton. I mean, people in the U.S. have a stigma about lamb.
Yeah, that's true.
Understand,
That's true.
it's been my favorite food. Whereas the Brits really, really like lamb, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they even like mutton.
That's right. Lancashire hot pot and Irish stew were the things I grew up with, made with mature meat, shall we say?
Yeah. So if you use it in stews, especially, you would think it would. It would work.
And coming back to Kyle's point about the chefs can taste the difference in that. I mean, sometimes I think you might find that people are, this is unexpected, and is this right? I think I know what pork or lamb tastes like, and this is different. And getting over that, maybe a little hump of saying it's different, but it's better.
Yeah, I can tell you
different, and therefore it's wrong.
So I can tell you one thing based on a very limited experiment, which was with my family growing up. So I was a pretty precocious 12-year-old, and I would take the bus from a suburb of LA down to the center of LA and go to the Grand Central Public Market. I'd go to the butcher and I'd ask for mutton and ask him to cut the oil gland out. And if you do that, it doesn't have a strong flavor. I bring it back home and I tell my family that it was lamb, and they never questioned that.
Okay.
Never knew the difference. So
good. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of mythology around lamb. So we got to overcome that somehow.
It strikes me as almost entirely a branding problem that people in the U.S., at least I grew up and was, for whatever reason, thought that mutton was like some chewy awful thing that you could only eat with like overcooked potatoes, and as I've matured as a cook and grown up and obviously been around more farmers, it's just a great meat. And there's speaking of chef's table, there's a great chef's table where they're searching for like the best beef, and they find this beef from a cow that's like 10 years old, and nobody can believe how great it is. And it's just new thing. Old dairy cows are now really prized for their beef.
Yeah. I think this, I see trendiness in things like belly pork and ox cheek that, growing up were just the real,
the cheap cuts,
the real cheap cuts, the things that you buy for the dog. But,
I want to do some land stamp cooking videos on those cuts. When I was in Morocco like a year and a half ago, and they would sell in Marrakesh in the market. They had these stalls where you could buy cooked lamb's head, and they would take the various meats out of it for you, and they were delicious. It's just incredibly, the texture and the flavor, sort of like a cabeza taco or a lengua taco in Mexico, so if you want people to eat lamb, and you also are a big proponent of zero waste, you got to eat the whole friggin' lamb. You got to find a way to eat every part of the lamb.
I have to.
I wait for Carl to chip in here and say that the saying is the pig, you eat everything but the squeak, right? Everything but the squeak.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most surprising things that I've had culinarily in the last couple of years is that we had a dinner where we had lamb fries. We do a lamb slaughter every year with my neighbor, And, we slaughtered, I think, 8 lambs last year, and we were all kind of, or 2 years ago now, and we were all kind of like, oh, we're going to have a suffer fest and try to get through the lamb fries for the year. And, and then we're completely blown away by how good they were. It was amazing. We had one, we did like a fried version with with a battered, and the other kind of almost like scallops, and they were incredible. And so I think there's a lot of missed opportunities there that are somebody's got to go advocate for it, but it's lamb is just as good, I think, head nose to tail as a pig is, to be honest.
Yeah. So I just want to give you guys a chance to think about where the world's going from a climate perspective, and from Martin's textile background, and Kyle, your farming background. Just, what's your hope for the world? Kyle, if you want to start, that's
sure.
Think about it.
Well, my hope and the kind of guiding principle of my work for the last 10 years has been to find a way to make small farms successful. And I, in the last year and a half in particular, become very hopeful that we're on the precipice of a lot of change. I mean, we've seen an enormous amount of change, and I think one of the big, I think 2 really major things happened. One is people realized how fragile a global economy was, and the other was everyone learned how to cook. And I think those 2 things have come together in a really interesting way. For me, as a local producer, I've seen interest from people who lived down the road from me for 4 years and never talked to me, coming up to the farm and saying, hey, I got to get a pig this year. I realized that I don't want to be buying from JBS. I don't want to be buying pork from China or from Brazil or somewhere where I don't know where it's coming from. I know you, I want to buy stuff from you. Has been one group of people who kind of came out of the woodwork. And the other group is a bunch of people who are, friends of mine who said, oh my gosh, like I used to eat out all the time. I started cooking, and now I realized that like there's way better food if, the difference in the quality of ingredients is so visible when you actually do the cooking yourself. Because you're not masking it with MSG or salt or whatever else. And so so I've seen these 2 things come together in a way where I think we're in a moment where people are really excited to support their neighbors, their neighbors' businesses, and I think that's really wonderful. And I also see people wanting to eat in a way that aligns with their values more closely. And so I think that puts us in a place in the kind of local, smaller scale ag industry where there's a real opportunity to practice the growing and regenerative practices that we've come to care about, and do it in a way that's financially viable, that frankly wasn't possible 5 years ago or even 2 years ago.
Martin?
The 3 basic human needs: food, shelter, clothing. So we're dealing with 2 out of those 3 today, and so that they are fundamental needs on a planet with 8 billion people. We struggle to do this in a way that's going to be good long term for the planet. That's what we have to learn to do. We use 100 million tons of textiles every year, only about 1 million tons of wool. So wool's about 1% of the market. We eat too much meat. We wear too many clothes. We have to learn to live with less, and we have to learn to live more locally, I think. So less global, more local. And we've got to understand, I think, that this industrial food and fiber business is going to let the world survive with 8 billion people while we still remember and learn anew the techniques that are going to carry us through to a more eventual, more sustainable future. That's my hope.
Right. You know, and I think food is ahead of apparel. You know, I think a lot of what Kyle talked about, folks discovering, and they've been discovering it pre-COVID, but it kind of intensified in COVID, that ingredients matter, knowing where it comes from, focus on local. That's all happening first in food, but I think apparel and fiber will follow, and it needs to. It needs to. And your point about what do we do with 8 billion people in the meantime is, you know, that's a legitimate point. But the transition that we need to make to something more local, we need to start doing that yesterday. So,
yeah.
Hey, this has been great, guys. I had a lot of fun.
Okay. Yeah.
Important stuff, and thank you for being part of this. Anything you're dying to say before we sign on?
No, it's been a great experience. So enjoyed the hours. Good conversations.
Yeah, same here. And if you want to buy, I would be remiss to say, if you want to buy local food, at least, we're not in the textile space yet, though, although this conversation has really opened my eyes to some things that I've got to start thinking about. My website, harvie.farm, HARVIE.farm, is we've got about 160 farms that all sell local products, many of them regeneratively raised, and in the worst case, you're purchasing from a neighbor who certainly you'll see that dollar come back quicker buying from them than from anywhere else.
Is Harvie just serving New York, or you
No, it's there's 160 farms around the U.S. and Canada,
and so you sell over the net and deliver that way?
Yeah, each farm runs its own program, but it's generally it's either a delivery or pickup, and it's unlike traditional CSAs, it's all customizable. So you kind of subscribe, but then you get whatever you want from the farm's box that week, and you can configure it on the website.
Good. Well, hopefully we'll give you some more customers.
I'm looking forward to it.
Again, both of Kyle, Martin, thanks so much.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.